Court of Appeals, John Sauer, one of the counsel for the president, was asked by a Court of Appeals Judge Penn in the D.C. Circuit whether under your theory of the case, his theory of the case, a president could order SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political opponent and not be subject to prosecution for it. Sauer's answer was effectively, that's right. Unless he were impeached first, he would not be subject to prosecution. Is that your view as well?
I think a similar question was also asked at the oral argument at the Supreme Court a few months later. I think the Supreme Court has now set forth a test in Trump versus United States that would address that hypothetical situation, which, based on my relationship, I might add, I think is outlandish, and I see no reason to think that that hypothetical would ever be a possibility.
Well, so is it your view as well, as it was Mr. Sauer's, that yes, the president could assassinate a political opponent and not be prosecuted for it if his party won't impeach him in the Senate?
I think Trump versus United States that you mentioned, Senator, now has addressed to some extent the impeachment judgment clause, and that is set forth in the opinion. It would be something that I would be bound as precedent to apply if I was to address.
With my hypothetical, what's your answer? The president orders SEAL Team 6 to kill his political opponent, one of them, maybe several, uses the military to do it, so it's within the scope of absolute immunity. Is it your view that he is not subject to prosecution for that if the members of his party will not impeach him?
With that hypothetical or any hypothetical that you might try to pose, Senator, I would just refer to the test that the Supreme Court has set out.
I'm asking you your view, so just tell me yes or no.
Yeah, and I want to tell you that as a judicial nominee, I don't want to prejudge any.
Okay, let me ask you a different one, see if you'll answer that. If a president took bribes to change the country's policy in the Gulf, purely personal or subject to immunity?
Brewster dealt with bribes, and in that case, the court said that a legislator could be prosecuted for bribery.
We're not talking about a legislator. We're talking about the President of the United States, who has immunity now thanks to your work in part. So let me ask you another question. If a president demanded money from a media organization in order to approve a merger, immune or purely personal conduct subject to prosecution?
Every hypothetical situation will be addressed by the test in Trump versus United States on what type of media.
If a president falsely arrested a sufficient number of senators such that he couldn't be impeached, is there a remedy for that?
For each of these hypothetical situations, the Trump versus United States test would be applied.
Okay, the Trump versus United States test would be applied, so the president is using the military to arrest members of Congress to prevent his impeachment. What's the remedy?
In each of these hypothetical scenarios, Senator, the remedy is...
What's the remedy?
The court would go through the different types of presidential power that might be at issue. There's a different test for absolute versus...
He's passed the test. He's got immunity unless he's impeached. That's what the court has held. And he's not impeached because he can't be impeached, because he's arrested enough of the Senate to prevent his impeachment or even an impeachment proceeding. What's the remedy?
So, Senator, as I've said, for each hypothetical scenario you're trying to present, the court would look at the different tests that the Trump versus United States...
You don't want to express your view on it because I think it's a shocking view. I think it was a shocking view that John Sauer expressed in the Court of Appeals. I think it's a shocking view that you hold, that the president's authority is so profound that he basically is above and beyond the law, that there's no remedy for a president who would abuse his power the way we have already seen and I fear we'll see in the future. I think the Roberts Court will go down in history. That will be their legacy as having enabled the worst form of corruption we've ever seen in the Oval Office. And you'll be a part of the team that made that possible. I yield back.
Senator Adam Schiff just cornered a Trump judicial nominee, forcing him into a terrifying admission about absolute presidential power, and the mainstream media is completely missing the true danger. What you are about to witness is a masterclass in dismantling the polished, academic facade of the Supreme Court's recent ruling on presidential immunity. In just a few minutes of relentless, razor-sharp questioning, Senator Schiff stripped away the legal jargon. Watch closely at the expression on the face of Mr. Smith, a judicial nominee and former member of the former president's legal team. Schiff traps him, forcing the conversation away from hollow legal theories and straight into the darkest possible scenario involving SEAL Team 6. If you ever believed that the Supreme Court granting absolute immunity was merely a harmless, abstract political debate, this footage is absolutely essential viewing. The trap does not spring shut immediately, but when it finally does, it exposes a chilling and fundamental loophole in the American legal system. You cannot afford to miss a single second of this exchange. Unlike typical congressional hearings where politicians often waste time with roundabout partisan rhetoric, Senator Schiff went straight for the jugular. He dragged nominee Smith back to the highly controversial Trump versus United States ruling. Schiff specifically reiterated the shocking argument made by the very same legal team that Smith once served. Senator Schiff reminded the room that John Sauer, an attorney for the former president, was previously asked a direct question by a D.C. Circuit appeals judge. The question was whether, under their theory of absolute immunity, a sitting president could order SEAL Team 6 to eliminate a political rival and still remain entirely shielded from criminal prosecution. Sauer's infamous response was that yes, unless the president was successfully impeached and convicted first, he would be completely immune. Schiff leaned in and demanded to know if Smith shared this exact same view. Smith attempted to deflect. He argued that the Supreme Court has now established a specific legal test to address such hypotheticals. He desperately tried to brush the scenario off as an outlandish impossibility, but Schiff refused to let him off the hook. The senator pressed again, asking point blank, can a president use the military to take out a rival and avoid prosecution if his own political party refuses to impeach him? Smith continued to hide behind the Supreme Court's newly minted guidelines, stating that he would be bound as a judge to simply apply the court's test. He claimed that as a judicial nominee, he could not prejudge any hypothetical case. Did you catch that subtle evasion? The senator asked a fundamental, normative question regarding basic morality and constitutional law. Does a commander-in-chief have the legal right to order the extrajudicial elimination of an American citizen? Any first-year law student could confidently answer no, but Smith could not bring himself to say it. Instead, he employed a classic defensive maneuver favored by the Washington elite, known as the Ginsburg Rule, where nominees refused to engage with hypotheticals to maintain an illusion of strict objectivity. He downgraded a terrifying abuse of power into a mere theoretical exercise. But let us dig deeper into the Supreme Court framework that Smith is so fiercely defending. According to the conservative majority's ruling, commanding the armed forces is considered a core, constitutional function of the executive branch, and therefore, it carries absolute immunity. If a president uses their authority as commander-in-chief to issue a directive to a military unit, that action is technically classified as an official act. The court explicitly asserts that prosecutors cannot use a president's personal, corrupt motives to strip away the immunity of an official act. This is the ultimate shield of the Washington elite. They utilize highly specialized legal jargon to avoid admitting a horrifying reality. Under the very legal theory they helped draft, the real answer to Schiff's question is a resounding yes. Realizing that the nominee had transformed into an impenetrable fortress against the violent scenario, the senator flawlessly pivoted his strategy. He launched an attack, focusing on a much more realistic, sophisticated, and frequent risk in the nation's capital: white-collar corruption. Because the Supreme Court ruled that a president can only face prosecution for purely personal conduct, the legal boundary becomes incredibly blurry. Where exactly is that line drawn when a president's constitutional authority touches almost every aspect of national and foreign policy? Schiff posed a new hypothetical. What if a president accepted massive financial bribes to alter the country's foreign policy in the Middle East? Is that personal conduct, or is it shielded by immunity? Smith immediately cited the United States versus Brewster precedent, noting that the court previously ruled a legislator could absolutely be prosecuted for bribery. Schiff quickly shot back, reminding Smith that they were not talking about a lowly legislator, but the President of the United States, who now wields unprecedented immunity thanks, in part, to Smith's own legal advocacy. Schiff pushed further. What if the president extorted money from a major media organization in exchange for approving a corporate merger? Smith, completely short-circuiting, repeated his robotic talking point, claiming that every single hypothetical would just be subjected to the Supreme Court's newly established test. Schiff had to cut him off. Every hypothetical situation would be addressed by the test. Think about the sheer absurdity of that statement. We are discussing blatant, mafia-style extortion from the Oval Office. We are talking about selling out critical national security policies to the highest bidder. Yet, the nominee's demeanor suddenly transformed into a pre-programmed answering machine. Notice how Smith deliberately conflates distinct legal concepts. By repeatedly citing the Brewster case, he attempts to draw a false equivalence. Brewster established that a senator could be prosecuted for bribery because taking money is clearly not a core legislative duty. But we are no longer dealing with a senator who possesses deeply limited powers. We are talking about the head of the executive branch, an office that was just handed an impenetrable suit of armor by the Supreme Court, armor that no standard lawmaker will ever possess. Smith's stubborn reliance on an outdated precedent, without daring to draw a clear ethical line, reveals a systemic and dangerous deadlock. They are actively creating a massive, undefined gray area where a sitting president can weaponize federal agencies and national policies for immense personal financial gain, while the justice system remains completely handcuffed by the very procedural hurdles the Supreme Court just invented. But Senator Schiff saved the fatal blow, the ultimate logical collapse of the Supreme Court's entire ruling, for the very end of his questioning. The central defense of those supporting absolute immunity has always been that we shouldn't worry, because the Constitution still provides the ultimate safeguard, the United States Congress. They argue that a rogue president would simply lose his power and immunity once impeached and removed by the Senate. So, Schiff asked the ultimate question: what happens if a corrupt president is calculating, dictatorial, and simply decides to forcefully turn off that impeachment switch himself? Schiff asked, what if a president uses the military to falsely arrest a sufficient number of opposition senators, specifically to ensure that a conviction vote can never happen? What is the legal remedy for that? Smith, completely visibly trapped, stammered that the court would apply the test. Schiff hammered him. The president is actively using the armed forces to arrest members of Congress to block his own impeachment. What is the remedy? Smith could only mumble about going through the different types of presidential power. Schiff delivered the final verdict. The president has passed the test. He has absolute immunity unless impeached. And he cannot be impeached because he just arrested the Senate. What is the remedy? Smith had absolutely no answer. This was the shocking, quiet part out loud moment. The senator had just brilliantly mapped out a perfectly legal blueprint for an authoritarian coup. The chief executive utilizes the military to arrest the very individuals constitutionally empowered to hold him accountable. And the man sitting before the Senate committee today, a legal professional actively seeking confirmation for a lifetime judicial appointment, simply shrugs and declares that there is no immediate remedy, only a procedural test. The hearing did not conclude with any form of bipartisan consensus. It ended with a damning, historical verdict from Senator Schiff, exposing the catastrophic ramifications of the current Supreme Court majority, led by Chief Justice Roberts. Schiff stated unequivocally that Smith refused to express his view because the view itself is fundamentally shocking. He declared that it is horrifying to believe a president's authority is so profound that he is literally above and beyond the reach of the law. Schiff warned that the Roberts Court will go down in the history books with a dark legacy, having officially enabled the absolute worst form of corruption we have ever witnessed in the Oval Office. And he looked the nominee in the eye and told him he would be remembered as part of the team that made the destruction of accountability possible. The worst form of corruption we have ever seen. What transpired in this Senate hearing room goes far, far beyond a standard partisan shouting match for cable news. It was a surgical dissection of the foundational principles of our democratic republic. This entire line of questioning exposed a devious, self-fulfilling loop. The conservative legal elite pushed for a ruling that grants the president virtually supreme, unchecked power. Then, when confronted with the most devastating, dictatorial, and extreme consequences of that exact ruling, they simply point back to the ruling's bureaucratic process as an excuse to completely deny any moral or legal responsibility. The infamous political swamp in Washington is no longer just a place where power brokers hide their dirty secrets in the shadows. The true existential horror lies in the fact that they can now stand proudly in broad daylight, weaponizing polished legal terminology to openly rewrite the rules of the American experiment, fully ensuring that the ultimate throne of executive power remains forever untouchable by the rule of law. By establishing an impossibly high burden of proof and granting an overly broad, sweeping immunity, the Supreme Court may have, whether inadvertently or intentionally, shattered the fragile constitutional structure of checks and balances that America's founding fathers carefully constructed over centuries. When the individuals wearing the judicial robes, these highly educated nominees, cannot or dare not clearly state that the political elimination of an American citizen by their own president is fundamentally illegal, that is the exact moment we must stop and ask ourselves, Who does this rule of law actually protect anymore? What are your thoughts on this unprecedented legal test? Is absolute immunity a necessary shield for a president to freely act in the volatile national interest? Or is it a definitive death sentence for our constitutional system of checks and balances? We need to hear your thoughts. Leave your comments and professional perspectives in the section below. Thank you for tuning in to this in-depth media analysis. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel as we continue to decode the dark, hidden side of the political power game. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next report.